I'm really pleased to bring Guy Lotrecchiano up to the stage today. Guy is an associate professor in the Department of Clinical Research and Leadership and of Pediatrics at George Washington University here in Washington. He's an internationally recognized leader and scholar in the field of team science, with research interests including transdisciplinary leadership, education, social mechanisms of team science, collaboration readiness, and changing dynamics in teams. He's participated and led research projects in biomedical, learning, and social sciences. And I think what's also important is that part of his focus is actually in practice. So he has done terrific work at Children's National Medical Center in Washington, D.C., where he's helped to establish a holistic approach to health professional training. So with that, I'd like to give welcome to Guy.
Thank you for that introduction. Let me get my good morning, everyone. Into the afternoon already. I want to thank everyone for having me today, and thank you especially the Succinct group for inviting me here. It's great when things work out the way you want them to. I am the last person probably from our team science community that has presented over the last day and a half. So I get to go back to my room last night and scratch my head and say, okay, what hasn't been said yet? What is left to say? But today confirmed that I was on the right track. As you heard a little bit earlier from Dr. Kozlowski, who takes an individual and organizational psychological approach, and then what we just heard Margaret talk about as far as the problems and challenges that go into setting up the type of environment that we talk about. I'm going to be talking to you more specifically from the lens of complexity science. Now, before you all go back into your computers and shut that down, I'm going to end up with hopefully something that is very palatable that you can take home with you as you continue to think about how you will lead these teams that are emerging. The themes I hope you hear resounding, both from my team science colleagues from yesterday and also from talks today, are leadership, adaptation, information and knowledge flow, which is going to be a big part of this, and emergence. Some people call that becoming what you're not yet. And I think it's appropriate for this particular group of people who are just starting off onto the process of figuring out how you're going to organize these teams. I'm making some major assumptions here, and that is one, that I'm talking to a group of leaders, people that are going to be responsible for others and influence others. Also, that organizations are somewhat self-organizing, and it's individuals and teams that actually affect the way organizations get put together, and that no one organizational design is optimum. I'm certainly hoping you weren't expecting me to give you the recipe for the right organization. That's not quite the way I look at it, and scientifically that would not be the way to present it to you. You are in positions of influence over individuals and over teams, and ultimately organizations, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and that there's many leadership models available to achieve this, as you've been hearing. Individual, team, and organizational emergence and problem solving go hand in hand. They are not separate things. You cannot put together the right organization, turn the page, and expect every complex problem that comes along to be able to be solved easily, as Margaret explained to us. So this idea of convergence research really has these two major prongs. The first one being the issue of what is a compelling or complex problem. I'm going to focus rather on the second, and that is deep integration across disciplines. So from the guidelines from NSF, their description of what this means is, as experts from different disciplines pursue common research challenges, their knowledge, theories, methods, data, research communities, and languages become increasingly intermingled or integrated. New frameworks, paradigms, or even disciplines can form sustained interactions across multiple communities. That may sound to some, if you weren't awarded, and you came in from the outside street, like a big mess. Like how can we talk different languages and get anything done? And or how can we imagine working through different methodological channels to get to an ultimate end. But as we know, that's both the challenge of what you're trying to accomplish, and it's also something that does not need to be an impediment to actually achieving the goals of your center or even the individuals that are part of your center. So a couple objectives for today. We're going to talk about problem solving as a dynamic process, meaning it has multiple and changing parts. Complex problem solving as a series of challenges requiring strategies on your part to overcome those challenges. And that you are a knowledge-producing team. So where we could talk about how teams get along and how they work best, I'm going to focus our attention to how knowledge actually gets developed and flows within an organization. So it's not just about, within a team, it's not just about do we get along, do we work well together, but rather how do we ensure that knowledge actually flows and gets developed from our interactions as a team. Knowledge-producing teams are complex adaptive systems, and they are, and that comes from complexity science, underscore adaptation, which is another theme we've talked about so far. There are both structural and interactive complexities within teams. We're going to get to skills on how to get over those challenges, and then ultimately, if we have time, talk about the difference between scientific and collaborative problem solving, which has different characteristics. So, I'm often asked, what's a complex problem? And it's a really hard question to answer because complex problems aren't just about the sum of their parts. Rather, what I'd like to think about, and I think it's particularly apropos for a group of engineers, is it's often the societal complexity rather than the technical complexity that makes complex problems so hard to address. This comes from the Australian Public Service Commission, and I think that's really important, and that theme has been brought up already, that technicality is really just a part of how ultimately we are going to be able to make a social impact, and it's really that social impact that is the most complex of the whole equation. So, looking at the individual level, these are members on your team. Complex problem solving is a collection of self-regulated psychological processes and activities. We learned a little bit about that from Steve before Margaret's talk. And problem solving processes combine cognitive, emotional, and motivational aspects, individual level. On the team level, creative combinations of knowledge and a broad set of strategies are needed. These are how your solutions are going to come through, and complex problems usually involve knowledge-rich requirements and collaboration amongst different persons. This is where we emphasize the cross-disciplinary, cross-team aspect. This is sort of your complex adaptive systems primer. Some of you are familiar with complexity science, but information interaction environments. These are the types of environments we're talking about. Those that are nonlinear. There's no dominant framework, but rather combinations of frameworks that come together. Some may dominate for periods of time, while others emerge as being more important over time. There are open systems where there are feedback loops. Some of those feedback loops are going to be distracting at times, while other times they're going to be enhancing. There's energy. Anyone who's been on a team knows there's energy in a team, and sometimes that energy will live on one side of the group, while at other times will live on other sides of the group. It's a continually changing environment, and it's not depicted through any one entity, event, or actor. Lastly, interactions between system components, individuals, groups, and orgs is a foundational feature of a complex adaptive system. So let's talk about these two types, structural and interactive complexities in teams. Structural complexities, perceived inequitable contributions to the project. We oftentimes believe that everyone should have the same sort of investment, the same sort of involvement, as if a unilateral engagement is the best. We know from our research in teams that is not necessarily true. And this is a complexity we sometimes have to deal with on a very practical level. We have some people that are very close to the center of the action at a particular time, while others are on the outskirts. But our principle of change needs to allow for that to change over time, to come in and out. Also, unbalanced problem ownership. We can't expect that everyone has the same, let's use a different word, passion about a particular problem, but they're brought in to be part of a team that ultimately is creating its own mental models and passions around a problem. And then lastly, we are going to deal with variability in communication, the types of skills necessary, and lack of team member satisfaction sometimes when the project progresses and the outcomes that we try to achieve. That's structural. Those are things having to do with how you're going to put your teams together and the skills you need to counteract those challenges. On the interactive level, there's a whole bunch here that we've talked about already. Differences in foundational training, geographic dispersion, lack of awareness of the breadth of the complexity of a problem, insufficient legitimacy. Are we the right people to try to solve this problem? Which often goes through teams' minds. Conflicting methodological standards. How do we measure? Should we measure? Should we use qualitative, quantitative, some combination of the two? And conflicting epistemological and ontological orientations. Lastly, differing level of transdisciplinary orientation among team members, as Margaret spoke about with the postdocs. Are we looking for people who know how to do this because they've always done it? That's probably somewhat futile because we don't tend to teach this very much. But do we bring in people that are disposed to the understanding of how we might do this new type of science? So I put a handout on everyone's table, and I have to apologize because the printer here sort of mangled it a bit, but it looks like this. It had a great header and a great footer and had lines and everything, but the printer somehow did not do a good job of it. I'm not going to go through it line by line, but I did want to draw attention to the structural and interactive system complexities and the types of skill focus that you as leaders might want to think about as you amass your teams, how you begin to think about what sort of supports and resources you may need to add into your team activities that are going to maintain this sense of adaptation, this sense of being a complex adaptive system and not getting too bogged down to structure all the time. Sometimes we spend way too much time on structure and we don't think enough about what we need to do intentionally to ensure adaptability. So for the sake of time, I'm just going to identify a couple features here. So on the first page where it says structural system complexities, stakeholder involvement, for instance. Here, and this was brought up yesterday, issues of translation across disciplines and how we're going to make sure that all stakeholders can participate in the goals of the group when we have these language barriers or these cognitive barriers or barriers that have to do with the way we tend to think about a particular science versus the way we think about another science. Development and the sustainability of scientific and non-scientific partners. How, as leaders, are we going to ensure that we can put scientists, non-scientists, citizen scientists, people that are closest to the problem together, and for all of those people to be able to contribute and the team ultimately to be able to garner information from those folks. And again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to emphasize the far right, because the far right are those skill sets that we hope that you as leaders constantly remind yourself are important to ensure that my team is going to remain an adaptive, agile team as you explore what it is that you have chosen to focus your attention on. Again, it did not come out so great on the handout, and these slides will be available. There is the citation to this work, and I'm so happy that my co-author sitting right here, Shalini Misra, and we hope you look that up. I'm not going to go through this for the sake of time, but the slides will be available. This does bring us to question, however, the difference between what most of us are used to, and that's scientific problem solving, and think more as a collaborative problem solving team. There are attitude and behavior challenges that go along with this, and I've listed some here, but as these slides will be available and to respect the time of the schedule, I'm going to leave that to you to look up on your own. And when we have questions, I'd be happy to answer any that come about as our next few speakers have an opportunity to speak. Thank you very much.